I'll talk today about research infrastructures that are not necessarily meant just for the library community or library communities, but that may be useful to library communities. In fact, in the past, we've seen several examples of how the developing European research infrastructures could be of interest to library researchers, as well as conservators and conservation managers. I have myself been involved in the development of the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science. That's what IRIS stands for. And before this infrastructure becomes truly a working infrastructure, there's also an infrastructure project that is available to the community, and that's called Hyperion HS. So I'll be talking about both of them a little bit, because in essence, they enable the same thing. They enable researchers and users, conservators, to access research facilities that may not be necessarily available to them in their own country or in their own region. Why is this being done? This is because of the interest of the European community to make investments into research infrastructure more efficient. These investments could be huge in the sense that, for example, the CERN infrastructure that everybody knows may cost several hundred millions or more, but there may be smaller infrastructures that are useful as well. For example, a conservation workshop could be an interesting research facility, because conservation could be seen as a research activity as well. It may be practice-led, but it's a research activity nevertheless. However, research questions in cultural heritage preservation are extremely complex, and because of that, they require an awful lot of different research facilities, and not all of those facilities are available in each of our countries. Germany has its fair share of excellent research facilities in this field, of course, but even a wealthy country like Germany cannot afford to invest into everything. So it's really important to share those facilities across the continent and perhaps globally. So the European Commission recognized through its policy body called European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructures that a special research infrastructure for the field of heritage science, or if you like, conservation science, if we use a more traditional term, is required. However, we also realized very soon that such a research infrastructure cannot be based in a single country. It cannot be based in a single town or city, if you like, and there are many good reasons why this is the case. Firstly, heritage is itself distributed. It doesn't exist in any institution alone, and it doesn't exist in any country alone. It is distributed. And secondly, because of the diversity of research facilities that are needed, the experience and the knowledge itself is extremely distributed as well. So the decision was made very soon that what we need here is not build a physical institution, but that we need to build a distributed infrastructure which makes the links between those centers of excellence, between those individual infrastructures and facilities that are best in their class in Europe and beyond. And that is what the plan is, to build a European research infrastructure for heritage science that has a central hub in Florence, because there isn't a more beautiful city in the world. I'm sure many people will disagree, but at least I think so. And also because it's led many infrastructure projects in the past. So there's a lot of understanding of how research infrastructures needs to be managed. However, the central hub in Florence will only coordinate research activities that will happen on national levels. So, for example, there may be a national hub in France, or there will be with any probability. There will be one in the UK, one in Spain, etc., etc. So it will be these national hubs that will take care of research projects, that will take care that facilities can be accessed in their own countries, because funding will come from national research funding bodies. There will be some European funding to support this activity on the central level, on the level of the hub, but the majority of funding will come from national funding institutions. So that funding will need to be pooled and apportioned to individual projects. Once such projects are submitted and positively evaluated, access to facilities themselves will be free to the user. So if a conservator needs an important document to be analyzed or characterized, all the costs of such analysis, all the costs of such research will be borne by the national funding bodies. And in order for that to happen, a consortium agreement that will be signed by national governments in 2022 will actually establish the infrastructure itself. Now, there are different ways that conservators as well as heritage institutions can become involved in this developing research infrastructure. The first possibility, or the first option, is for an institution, for example, a research library or a laboratory, to offer their own facilities for access within the research infrastructure. And within Germany, we are already in conversation with many individual institutions, such as the Rathgen laboratory, for example, and similar, because there's a lot of interest to share expertise on the European level. However, there is one condition, of course. There needs to be a demonstrated level of excellence, and of course that is not a problem for many world-class institutions in Germany as well as elsewhere. However, it's really interesting to consider the definition of what a research infrastructure might mean. And there is a very, very good definition of a research infrastructure on the ESFRI website. It's a unit within which, in our case, conservation or heritage science research can be done or accessed for the purpose of research. And as I said previously, such units could consist of conservation workshops as well, but could be a scientific laboratory or other types of research units in addition. The second pathway for engagement, both of individuals as well as institutions, would be to offer strategic direction to such infrastructures. Namely, research infrastructures, their main purpose is to offer research to those who don't have access to research facilities in their own institutions. However, in order to do that in the most useful way to the user community or to the user communities, such research infrastructures need direction. In order to provide direction, libraries, archives, museums, and galleries should become involved in the management of research infrastructure such that the research that they provide is useful to them. So they could either become engaged through intergovernmental organizations. For example, ICROM is a member of the IRIS family, or they could become engaged through the user forum, which is a forum of individuals, including decision makers, conservators, as well as scientists, or they could become engaged through the various advisory bodies of the research infrastructures. And I cannot stress the importance of this, because research infrastructures can only be useful if they respond to real questions that come from heritage organizations. Within the user forum, I have the pleasure of organizing the Heritage Science Academy, and within this academy we are offering various types of activities, including training in the use of various research techniques, but also training for scientists in topics such as collaborative research or interdisciplinary research and similar. We had several, we organize a monthly webinar, and many of these webinars are meant to inform both the research community and the conservation and decision-making community. And just a couple of months ago, we had a webinar that focused specifically on how research infrastructures should engage the arts and humanities community. Of course, the third and potentially most important way of engaging with research infrastructures would be to do research within those infrastructures. So anybody who has a research question that could be answered by the many facilities contained within the family of IRIS could do research by submitting a proposal and pending that proposal being favorably evaluated, they can access one of the 4 platforms. These platforms are practically organized in the way that the ArcLab platform offers access to archives of material samples, for example, or archives of conservation data, conservation reports, or grey literature. The second platform is the digital platform, which we call DigiLab, which will offer a range of digital tools for data analysis and for organization and similar. The FixLab infrastructure or platform is probably the most self-evident. These are fixed laboratories and fixed facilities that can be made useful to conservation research. And the fourth platform is very much in demand, and this is the MoLab platform, where a mobile laboratory unit visits the library, archive, museum, or gallery and offers the many portable analytical and other techniques, for example, imaging, to conservation managers or conservators. So let's have a quick look at a couple of examples, or a few examples that I pulled out of the archive of many successful projects that were done in the past, similar projects, similar infrastructure projects. There was a project, for example, at the in Spain at IPSI, where analysis on and research was done on photographic materials, specifically focusing on gelatin glass plate collections. In Madrid, there is a collection of these glass plates that could be studied and where research into these glass plates could be done. And research questions were very practical, very practice-oriented, such as, for example, what are the methods and techniques to identify glass plate negatives? How or what storage techniques are needed to preserve those plates in the long term? What supports, how does the glass support deteriorate, and similar. So researchers can access those archives of data and of materials for the purpose of informing their own practices or informing their own research projects. There are other ArcLab platforms, for example, collection of samples, say cross-sections or collections of archival material, library material. I myself manage a collection of Islamic paper, a collection of Tibetan paper, or a collection of East Asian paper that can be made for the purpose of research. The second platform that I'd like to focus on is the DigiLab platform, and We'll see during the tomorrow's workshop what digital tools enable us to do. And I'll be showing a few examples of such digital tools together with my colleague Cristina Duran. And these are remotely accessible, very often modeling or data storage, data querying tools, computational research tools that enable researchers to explore scenarios or model scenarios and similar. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you have a screenshot of such a tool that enables conservators to calculate indoor concentrations of traffic-generated pollutants, which may be really useful in some cases where monitoring is impossible or cannot be afforded, but external concentrations of such pollutants are known and can be entered into this tool, and the indoor concentrations can be modeled, which is actually really useful before we even decide that monitoring is physically necessary, because that obviously involves an investment. There is a range of fixed lab facilities that are useful to library communities, but I'll focus on one in particular. This is the Hyperion HS Macromolecular Heritage Laboratory. Many library and archival materials are macromolecular materials, so this is probably one of the most useful facilities available. And there is on the right-hand side, you can see a screenshot from a YouTube video that describes this particular facility and talks a little bit more about the many techniques that it makes available, such as characterization techniques, collection modeling techniques, accelerated degradation techniques, environmental monitoring techniques, and etc., etc. This laboratory is currently involved in a research project together with the Library of Congress, looking at their identical books project, and particularly looking at methods that they are using for the purpose of characterization of those materials. So you can already hopefully get a sense of the range of research projects that are possible. And finally, the fourth platform is the mobile laboratory platform, which, as I said, is used an awful lot. And on the right-hand side, you see a screenshot of a report of a project that was done at the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, looking at Quran manuscripts in that particular collection. So the mobile laboratory was transported to that library and set up for the purpose of research at the library, and illuminations were investigated, the material culture was investigated, paper and parchment were investigated as well, supplying the library with a wealth of information with respect to the materiality of these extremely, extremely important and valuable objects. So if your institution doesn't have a research facility available and you require such research for the purpose of your conservation or for the purpose of your projects, then the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science is a very good option to think about. Just a little bit about the timeline of establishment of this particular infrastructure. We started several years ago, even before 2016, of course, because a bit of preparation was needed, a bit of lobbying was needed. But in 2016, the most important decision was made, and that was to put our project on the ESFRI roadmap. This is the European infrastructure roadmap, if you like. In 2017, the European Commission invested a little bit of money to develop a budget for this infrastructure, to develop a series of documents that are needed to establish the infrastructure, and the so-called Step 1 was submitted to the European Commission last year. In the meantime, Through the Hyperion HS project, these infrastructures are already available for access, and there are calls every 3 months through which access can be granted. In 2022, the plan is for the European Commission and for 16 or however many national governments to sign a consortium agreement and to formally establish this research infrastructure and make it and develop a legal body with the seat in Florence. I'm showing this map of potential members with a big hole in the middle. It still hasn't been possible, unfortunately, to engage the German government in this discussion, and we are absolutely hoping that this will be the case in the near future. We are working with our colleagues in Germany to develop the case, but so far it doesn't look that Germany will be signing this consortium agreement, and I very much hope that in the future this will be possible. This doesn't mean, of course, that German institutions or individuals cannot access the European research infrastructure. That is absolutely possible, but others cannot access German research infrastructures, and those are phenomenal. And we would really like to be able to do so, but of course, this dialogue with the German government needs to be enabled. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you for having me.
Vielen Dank, Matija Strlič. Und wir alle haben uns gerade groß angeschaut, als es hieß, Deutschland sei noch nicht offiziell mit an Bord. Verwunderlich genug. Ich drücke Ihnen die Daumen, dass dieser Vorstoß dann doch, funktioniert und zum Positiven führt. Aber vielleicht können Sie uns noch ein bisschen verraten, welche Strategien Sie denn verfolgen, um noch mehr Interessenten ins Boot zu holen. Was für Strukturen, was für Rahmenbedingungen braucht es, um noch einen besseren Austausch zwischen den unterschiedlichen Institutionen herzustellen?
So the way that the infrastructure works is that there is a central website through which the projects need to be submitted. Those projects have a very formal structure, as any project, I suppose. And in the development of that project, it is really useful to contact the research infrastructure in advance, to explain what your research questions are, to get advice on what facilities might be best suitable for your particular research question. And I should also say that the research projects are selected not only on the basis of institutional needs, but also on the basis of scientific novelty. So what the research infrastructure doesn't do is routine research investigation. For that, infrastructures already exist. So once that initial consultation has happened, then the research project may or may not be approved. And as I said, the access itself is made free to the institution or to the individual. Now, in order to popularize this, we are working with institutions. We are working with we already have more than 80 laboratories involved, and we are working in order to make that process as streamlined as possible. Among those institutions are heritage institutions as well, such as the Louvre, the Rijksmuseum, for example, for example, the British Museum and the British and the National Gallery in London are long-term members of this network as well. In the States, there is a national node being developed by the Smithsonian Institution, another one at the Getty. So many heritage institutions have come forward and made their research infrastructures available as well, which is why I'm saying it's really important to get involved on both the institutional level and at the individual level.
Absolut einleuchtend. Also der Austausch, je mehr Menschen profitieren oder sich einreihen, desto mehr Institutionen und individuelle Personen können davon profitieren. Wenn Sie jetzt mal in die Zukunft schauen, 10 Jahre von heute aus, was für eine Vision haben Sie? Wie könnte das irgendwann mal aussehen, dieses Netzwerk?
There is an official response and an unofficial response.
Let's listen to both.
So in our plan is that 5, maybe 10 years from now, we will have several 10,000 users per year. We already have user numbers in the thousands because many users access our research facilities physically, but many are digital users as well. So as we develop our digital platform, I'm sure that the number of digital users is going to increase by a factor of 10 or more. Unofficially, well, that's semi-official as well, we are hoping to develop a global research infrastructure. And there are already plans in place to develop similar national nodes in Latin America. We're working with the Mexican colleagues very, very well already, with colleagues in Brazil and elsewhere. So we're really hoping that other national governments across the world will start seeing this infrastructure as something they could buy into. We have colleagues in China, colleagues in Egypt and elsewhere who really want to work with us, but the international frameworks still need to be negotiated. So my personal vision is that 10 years from now, this is going to be the most successful distributed research infrastructure in Europe, and that we will be negotiating those international agreements.